Welcome to our first session within our series of Fruits of the Spirit, and Jonathan obviously introduced this to us last week most excellently. If you weren't there or you haven't managed to watch the video, then it really does help set the scene for the unpacking each of the individual fruits. And today we're going to be looking at the fruit of faithfulness. And before we look at faithfulness as an individual fruit, I just wanted to kind of reset those perimeters briefly, remind ourselves of the context or the points that underpin this series. So first of all, we would say that fruit can't be grown by a person. We can produce fruit, but we don't actually do the growing. By giving it the right environment, we help it to grow. So perhaps a better word would be saying that we can cultivate it. You can't force fruit to grow. It's not like laying an egg, you can push it out. It's actually something that you can cultivate fruit. And it's important to remember that fruit will grow anyway, and we either produce good fruit or bad fruit. So by their fruits of their labours, they'll be known as to whether they're productive people in the kingdom or not. It's kind of one way that we can describe that. Number two, Jesus said that he's the vine and we're the branches. So we don't grow in isolation. We have to be grafted into the vine, and that provides our access to the nutrients and the resources, if you will, the very life force that we require to be able to grow fruitfully. And number three, we all produce fruit, and the kind of fruit we produce demonstrates the health of the plant, as I've already mentioned. Number four, the growth of fruit in our lives is evidence of the process of being transformed into Christ's likeness. And you can read that in 2 Corinthians 3:18, but also in Romans 8:29, it says that we're to be conformed to the likeness of his son. So it is a process, and a sanctification is the word we sometimes use for that process of being turned more and more into God's image. And number five, all of these fruits are visible in God's character. So we should reflect that in our lives as we grow to be like our Father. So hopefully that's just a quick reminder really of the context of the fruits. Now we're going to look specifically at the fruit of faithfulness. So that might have caught you out because that's not necessarily the order that they're printed in, but we're going to look at faithfulness today. So first of all, what does the word faithfulness actually mean? And very helpful online dictionary, dictionary.com, takes us through the following suggestions. It's quite long, but I think it's quite helpful. So as a noun, faithfulness as a noun means lasting loyalty and trustworthiness in relationships, especially marriage and friendship. So that's talking about kind of covenant relationships, but loyalty and trustworthiness, two helpful words. Faithfulness also means the fact or quality of being true to one's word or commitment as to what one has pledged to do or professes to believe. So we have that aspect of being faithful to the gospel, okay? Faithful to the gospel, faithful to that which we have been saved into. Another one is the fact or quality of being dedicated and steadfast in performing one's duty or working for a cause. So the faithful working for a cause or an outcome. And there's also the definition of the quality of adhering to fact, a standard or an original. So that is faithful to the original text, so faithful to the word of God, for example. And those definitions rather for that word shows that there is an awful lot to do with faithfulness, that we may have a version of that word, but it can be used in many different ways. Another thing to remember with the word faithfulness is that, or the fruit of faithfulness even, is that this is a description of God's divine nature. Okay, it's not just about a fruit in our lives. This is this reflection of God's character, and it's reassuring, I think, particularly in this last year that we've been through, that in this ever-changing world that we live in, there might have been a slight song lyric in there. Only two things are certain in life, and I think it's Benjamin Franklin, I think, that said, or is one of the early quotes of saying, "There's only two things certain in life, and that is death and taxes." I think it may have been said by others earlier, possibly in print, but it's not normally attributed to him. But also, I believe as Christians, we have one third thing we can be sure of, and that is God's faithfulness. There is a definite security in our lives of going, we know and believe and can trust in God's faithfulness. So death, for sure, we know where we're going. Taxes, well, yeah, maybe. I think we're going to always have those. In fact, God talks about those in the Old Testament, doesn't he? When the people of Israel ask for a king, he says, "That's fine, you can have a king, but he will tax you stupid if you do." And they still want a king anyway. But we can be sure of God's faithfulness too. Now, when you start looking at the word faithfulness in terms of the fruits of the Spirit, there's various commentaries that people have written, and people know a lot more about Greek and things than I do. But the word faithfulness can also be translated as fidelity. And fidelity is quite an old-fashioned word, isn't it, really? I don't think when I saw that, I thought, yeah, we don't really use that in common language, or I don't anyway. So in older versions of the Bible and older commentaries, it's quite often used. And fidelity also means that trustworthiness. It's kind of perhaps a nearer link to trustworthiness. This is a characteristic of someone who is reliable. And Matthew Henry, I quite like the old Matthew Henry commentaries. There might be a few kind of weird bits in there, but on the whole, it's quite a simple thing to understand. I quite like it. And he explains that the fruit of the Spirit can be understood as faith, obviously, this is faithfulness, I should say, faithfulness, as faith, as fidelity, as justice, as honesty, and in what we profess and promise to others. So there's something about what we speak out and what we do that is part of this faithfulness. Now, Jonathan mentioned last week that the fruits all represent aspects of God's character, and that we're able to catch those. That term, is it commutable? Where a bit like contagion, you can pass it on, you can catch it if we're near enough to him. So if we, as we're being transformed into God's image, if we take that idea of saying the nearer we draw to him, the more we catch his whole character, his whole personality, his attributes, and we're able to absorb those, for want of a better term, and we become more like that. We measure ourselves against that. We get inspired to be like that. And God is faithful in all his ways. Okay, we sing about faithful one, so unchanging, reliable. That's in there, isn't it? God's faithfulness is not in doubt, I would suggest. We, however, can be slightly more unreliable, can't we? We can be unreliable as people. Jesus told the story, which you may well remember, of the two sons, and the father's asking them to do some work, and one son says, yeah, I'll do that, count me in, I'll do that, that's not a problem, I'll do it later, but I'll do that. And the other son kind of goes, I don't really want it, don't really fancy that, and effectively refuses to help. But then later on, the son who was all, yeah, I'll do it, actually gets distracted and goes off and does something else. And the son who started off by going, I don't really want to do it, he's the one that actually gets up and completes the work. And then Jesus poses the question at the end. He says, well, which one of those really did the will of the Father? Which one of those actually did what was required? And obviously it's the son who acted, not the son who merely said he was going to act. From this, I think it's safe to conclude that God is not particularly impressed with words alone, and words and deeds together seems to be the key. And in James, we're told, don't just be hearers of the word, but be doers also. Otherwise, we're actually deluding ourselves in effect. And here's an application that I think is particularly relevant for this fruit of faithfulness in our lives, and that's in the workplace. Is actually a commentary based. It's called the Workplace Commentary, or Work Something Commentary. It's quite interesting. It's available on Gateway, thebiblegateway.com, as a free kind of copyright free thing that you can look at, and it's quite helpful because it does apply stuff into our workplace quite well. But I think faithfulness in the workplace is a massive key witness to others, isn't it? I mean, it is in life generally, but particularly in the workplace. If you say you'll do something, making sure you carry it through is really key. It shows the fruit of faithfulness in action, and people notice that because not everyone is true to their word. So if that is the fruit, and that's the benefit of demonstrating that fruit in our lives, what is it that we can actually do to cultivate that fruit. We've already kind of had to acknowledge you can't grow fruit yourself. It's not, you can't force it. But that word cultivate, I think, is a helpful one. We can create an environment that is beneficial for fruit to grow. So spending time focusing on the faithful one has got to be key, hasn't it? And there's that old song, the hymn, in fact, we've sung it recently at Grace Church as well. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, and all the things of the world will grow strangely dim. And it's that idea that what we put our heart after, what we chase after, what we spend our time on, that's where our treasure will be, isn't it? So if we're putting our treasure in material things, I think Jonathan mentioned comfort last week as well, or money, or revenge, whatever it is, whatever we put our focus into, that will end up leading to those actions. Therefore, let's turn our eyes upon Jesus. And I think it's so important to remember that this cultivating fruit is all about the grace of God in our lives. It's yes, it's a commitment and a decision, but ultimately it's the grace of God working in us that allows us to bear this fruit. If left to our own devices, we know we wouldn't get anywhere. We wouldn't be able to produce anything of our own. So all our good works on their own are nothing, counted as rubbish before God. But if we understand it's coming from grace, then it becomes easier, because suddenly it's not our burden to carry, is it? It's not our responsibility to carry. It's our response, because Christ first loved us. That's why we respond to him. So I think that's important to bear that in mind when we're looking at, how do we develop this fruit. But let's use an illustration from marriage. So when we get married, we make a commitment to love each other, to honour and obey, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. But if we think, oh, that's it, everything's going to be fine now, we're just saying those vows, that'll be enough, we'll be sorted, we'll be together for 50 years, no problem at all, then we've not understood the process of marriage, that those vows are a commitment to action. I'm going to choose to do this. I commit to do this, whether it goes well or whether it goes badly, in sickness and in health, for better, for worse. It's a journey. It's actually a daily commitment to say we're going to keep loving and keep honouring and keep working through the tough times and keep enjoying the good times. And God's faithfulness is the same. Okay, he promises to never let us go, even when we walk away. And you can think of the story of Jonah as an example of that. He runs away, and yet God still says, no, I've got a purpose for you. I've got a mission for you. And I still want to help those other people that you need to go and tell to repent and turn to me. Even when we try and run the other way, God is still faithful there, searching for us. That one sheep that goes astray, God goes and gets it back. So we are very secure in that sense. As a personal example, Claire and I have had some experience of this within our own family through adoption, and it's shown us that being faithful can be costly. It amazes us how much God's grace is so linked to his faithfulness. Those two things, without doubt, go together. You can't have one without the other. So God never lets us go, however much we lash out, however much we kick out, however much we scream or shout at him, however much we go our own way and want to do our own stuff, however many doors we slam. Even when we do things deliberately to kind of try and offend God and look for a fight with him, he's still faithful, and he doesn't give up on us. And he's there like that prodigal son, where the son's gone off and done everything. He's wasted everything that's been given to him. He has spoiled his inheritance, hasn't he? He's wasted the lot. He has actually done stuff. I think it's key, isn't it, in that story, that he's off with the pigs. So for a Jewish person, being off with the pigs, that was a pretty bad deal. Okay, you can't get much worse than that. Proper, unclean by all those kind of law requirements. The lowest of the low is literally what that means. Eating pig food, we are really at that lowest point. And yet what does the Father do? He stands and waits faithfully to welcome the Son back. And due to God's grace, he is still standing there. He faithfully waits for us. He is consistent with us. He's reliable. He's trustworthy, he's unchanging, he's strong, he's loyal, he's true, he's steadfast. They're all words that link to this fruit of faithfulness. And if we are demonstrating that in our lives, if we're allowing that fruit to come to fruition, if we're cultivating faithfulness in word and deed, that gift that is given to us, it's a free thing, this grace, isn't it? We can't earn it, given to us freely. If we cultivate it and allow it to grow, what a witness we can be if we are full of that fruit of faithfulness in our lives, reflecting the promise of God to never give us up, to never leave us, to never forsake us. Okay, thank you.